Hello everyone, and welcome back to Little Nightmare. I'm Michael, and before we begin, I'd like to ask for a little support. Please subscribe, leave a like, and if you do, let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. These may seem like small gestures, but they're essential for helping the channel grow and allowing me to keep bringing you these stories every night. Now, lower the volume just a bit. Get comfortable, turn off the lights, and let's dive together into tonight's first story. Story 1. The first thing Craig noticed was the silence. It was not the simple absence of sound, but an active, swallowing quiet. The old farmhouse, a sprawling wooden beast settled in a cradle of Pennsylvania hills, had always been a symphony of small noises. The groan of ancient floorboards settling deeper into their foundations, the scuttle of some unseen thing in the walls, the constant weary sigh of the wind through the cracks in the clapboard. These were the house's breaths and heartbeats, the sounds that had greeted him every summer of his childhood. Now, as he stood in the doorway, his duffel bag a heavy weight on his shoulder, there was nothing. The house was holding its breath. He had come to settle his great-aunt's affairs. Beatrice, the family's unshakable matriarch, was gone. A sudden fall, a quick decline, a quiet funeral had missed by a week. The news had felt distant, a small tremor from a far-off earthquake, but standing here in the throat of the silence, the loss became a physical thing, a cold spot in the air. He stepped inside. The click of the latch behind him unnaturally loud, a gunshot in a church. The air was thick and still, carrying the faint, sweet smell of decay that clung to old wood and dried flowers. Dust motes, disturbed by his entrance, swam in the bars of late afternoon light that cut through the grimy windows. He ran a hand along the banister of the staircase, the wood grain smooth and cool as bone. Everything was in its place. A crocheted blanket was folded with geometric precision over the back of a worn armchair. A single china cup sat on a saucer on the small table by the window, a dried brown stain at its bottom. It was as if Beatrice had simply stepped out for a moment, but the silence argued otherwise. It was a patient silence, a waiting silence. That first night the sounds returned, but they were wrong. Instead of the familiar groans, he heard a soft, rhythmic scraping, like a tree branch rubbing against the roof, though there were no trees that close to the house. He lay in the bed in the guest room, the one that had always been his, and listened. It was a dry, persistent sound, the sound of something trying to get in, or perhaps the sound of something already inside, moving slowly through the walls. He told himself it was the house, just the house, missing the weight of its keeper. He fell into a fitful sleep haunted by formless dreams of shifting shadows and a profound, aching loneliness. The next day, he met Gwen. She ran the small general store in the hollow at the bottom of the hill, a place that smelled of cured meat and old paper. Her hair was the color of wheat, and her eyes held a quiet steadiness that felt like an anchor in the strange unease that had taken root in him. She had been a friend to Beatrice, bringing her groceries and, in the last years, her prescriptions. She was a tough old bird, Gwen said, her voice soft. She handed Craig his change, her fingers brushing his, a brief, warm contact. Sharp as a tack right to the end, but the last few weeks, she changed. Craig felt a cold trickle down his spine. Changed how? Gwen looked past him, out the store's fly-specked window towards the hill where the farmhouse sat. She got quiet. Not sad quiet. Watchful. She kept talking about the soil. Said it was getting hungry again. She'd sit on that porch of hers for hours, just staring out at the woods like she was waiting for someone. She shook her head, a small, tight motion. I'm probably just remembering it wrong. Grief does funny things. But Craig knew she wasn't. The hunger of the soil. The phrase, echoed in his head as he walked back up the hill, the grocery bag heavy in his arms. The woods that pressed in on the property seemed darker, denser. The sunlight that reached the forest floor was weak and green, and the air carried a rich, loamy scent of decomposition. He found himself staring at the ground, at the dark, moist earth between the roots of the oaks. It did look hungry. The scraping that night was louder, more insistent. It was joined by a new sound, a faint, melodic humming that seemed to come from no particular direction but from the air itself. It was a beautiful sound, ancient and sorrowful, and it wrapped around his mind like smoke, pulling him down into a sleep that was not sleep but a state of rapt attention. He dreamed of a man who was not a man, a figure of elegant darkness with eyes that were old and empty, standing at the foot of his bed. The figure did not move, did not speak, but Craig felt an invitation, a seductive pull towards a silence more absolute than any he had ever known. He woke with a gasp, his heart hammering, the taste of damp earth thick on his tongue. He started cleaning out Beatrice's room, hoping the mundane task would ground him. In the bottom drawer of her nightstand, beneath a stack of neatly folded handkerchiefs, he found a journal. The early entries were mundane accounts of weather, garden yields, and visits from Gwen. But the later pages changed. The handwriting, once firm and confident, became a spidery scrawl. October 12th. The ground is soft behind the barn. It shouldn't be. We've had no rain. I saw a shadow today that had too many legs. It tasted like old wine and forgotten words. October 25th. He is walking again. I hear his song in the wind. He is so beautiful. It's a crime to be that beautiful. He wants to show me the quiet places. He says my name without sound. Beatrice. It sounds like falling sand. November 3rd. I will not open the door. I will not answer the song. The soil is hungry. It wants a new keeper. It wants to be fed. God help the boy if he comes. Craig dropped the journal as if it had burned him. The boy. He was the boy. He stumbled out of the room and onto the porch, gulping the cold air. The rational part of his mind, the part that had been to college and studied engineering, screamed that this was the rambling of a dying, lonely old woman. But the older, more instinctual part, the part that knew the fear of the dark, knew it was the truth. He was not alone here. He was a guest, and his host was growing impatient. That was when he saw Cade. The man was just there, at the edge of the tree line, leaning against a gnarled oak as if he had been waiting for a long time. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in worn, dark clothing. His face was lined and severe, and his eyes were the pale, washed-out blue of a winter sky. They held no warmth, only a flat, assessing calm. "The house doesn't like you," the man said. His voice was a low rasp, like stones grinding together. "It's still hers. It's fighting for you." "Who are you?" Craig asked, his own voice trembling. "Cade," the man said. He pushed himself off the tree and walked towards the porch, his movements economical and precise. "Your aunt and I had an understanding. We kept the watch." "The watch for what?" Cade's eyes scanned the house, the woods, the sky. "For him, the quiet man, the listener in the soil. He has many names. He is very old and he travels. He finds a place that is lonely, a person who is lonely. And he puts down roots. He feeds on silence, on absence. He makes more of it." Cade looked directly at Craig, and for the first time, Craig saw a flicker of something in those pale eyes. Pity. He's chosen your aunt's land, and now that she's gone, he's looking for a new anchor. He's looking at you. Cade became a constant, grim presence. He spoke little, but his knowledge was vast and terrifying. He told Craig of the creature, an entity from a place where light and sound were dying embers that drifted through the cracks of the world. It did not kill in the traditional sense. It curated silence. It convinced its victims to willingly step into the quiet, to unravel themselves into the stillness it offered. It was a predator of the soul, and its hunt was one of seduction. "It will use your grief against you," Kate said one evening as they sat at the kitchen table. The journal opened between them. "It will show you a piece that is really nothingness. It's already started. The dreams, the humming." "What do we do?" Craig asked, his voice small. "We remind the world to make noise," Cade said. He nodded towards Gwen, who had come up the hill with food and a determined set to her jaw. "She is your best weapon. Her life, her warmth, her sound. It offends him." "And this," he said, tapping the journal, "Beatrice will. Her fight is in these words. We have to make our stand here. He is weakest when he is perceived, when he is named." The next few days were a strange kind of siege. They filled the house with light and sound. Craig kept the radio playing, a low hum of static and distant voices. Gwen baked, filling the air with the warm, yeasty smell of bread, a scent of life and sustenance. Cade walked the perimeter of the property, hanging old, tarnished bells from the branches of the trees, his lips moving in silent, grim litanies. They were a small, fragile bastion against the encroaching quiet, but the silence fought back. The radio would suddenly die, the dial spinning to a dead station that emitted only a soft, hissing void. The smell of bread would be overridden by the sudden, overpowering scent of wet clay and rotting leaves. The bells outside would fall silent, not a tinkle to be heard, even when the wind blew, and the dreams grew stronger. The quiet man no longer stood at a distance. He stood beside Craig's bed, his form a shifting outline of deeper darkness. His face was a smooth, pale oval, beautiful and terrible in its emptiness. He had no mouth, but Craig heard his voice nonetheless, a vibration in the marrow of his bones. "You are so tired," the voice whispered. "The noise of the world is a pain to you. I can take it away. All of it. The loneliness, the fear, the endless, grating sound of your own heart. Come walk with me in the still places. It is so peaceful here." It was a lie. Craig knew it was a lie. But it was the most beautiful lie he had ever heard. The promise of an end to struggle, to feeling, was a siren song. He would wake with tears on his face, his body aching with a desire for that final, perfect silence. The climax came on a night when the moon was a sliver of bone in a starless sky. The silence descended like a physical weight, so complete it felt like a pressure on the eardrums. The lights in the house flickered and died. The three of them, Craig, Gwen, and Cade, stood together in the living room, armed with nothing but a hurricane lamp and their fraying resolve. The front door swung open without a sound. He stood there, the quiet man. He was taller than a man, and his presence sucked the warmth from the room. The air grew frigid. He was not a monster of claws and teeth. He was a monument to absence. Looking at him was like looking at the concept of zero given form. He took a step inside, and the floorboards did not creak. He was the silence given flesh. Gwen screamed. It was a raw, human sound, a lance of pure, defiant noise in the face of the void. The creature flinched, a subtle ripple in its form. Cade began to speak, his voice a low, steady chant, in a language Craig did not know. It was an old language, a language of names and boundaries, and each word was a stone thrown against the oppressive quiet. But the creature's focus was on Craig. It glided towards him, its beautiful empty face tilted. The seductive whisper filled Craig's mind, louder now, drowning out Cade's chant, Gwen's frightened sobs. "They are just more noise. They will leave you, as all things do. I will never leave you. I am the only truth, the final note. Let go." Craig felt his will dissolving. It would be so easy to stop fighting, to embrace the quiet. He took a step towards the creature. "Craig, no," Gwen shouted. She grabbed his arm, her grip fierce. "Look at me." He turned his head, his movements slow, as if moving through deep water. He saw her face, streaked with tears, her eyes wide with fear, but also with a ferocious love. He saw Cade, his face a mask of grim effort, his voice growing hoarse as he fought to hold the line with words alone. He saw the lamp, its flame a tiny brave dance in the overwhelming dark. They were sound. They were life. They were messy and painful and beautiful. He turned back to the quiet man, and he screamed. It was not a scream of fear, but of refusal. A primal, messy, human noise that came from the very core of his being. He poured all his grief for his aunt, all his fear, all his newfound love for Gwen, all his hope into that one. Raw sound. The creature recoiled. Its perfect form wavered, like a reflection in disturbed water. The beautiful lie of its face fractured for a second, and Craig saw what lay beneath. An infinite, yawning emptiness. A hunger that could never be sated. It was not peace. It was oblivion. With a sound like a vast intake of breath, the creature unraveled. It did not vanish in a flash of light, but simply dissipated. The pressure in the room lifted. The familiar groan of the floorboards returned. The faint, steady tick of the grandfather clock in the hall began again. A sound more precious than any symphony. It was over. Weeks later, the farmhouse was sold. Craig and Gwen packed the last of Beatrice's things into a rental truck. The hills were green under a bright sun, and the woods were full of the chattering of birds and squirrels. Cade was gone, having melted back into the landscape from which he came, a silent sentinel moving on to the next threatened quiet. As Craig pulled the truck door shut, he paused and looked back at the old house. It stood silent, as it always had. But the silence was different now. It was just a silence, the simple absence of noise. It was not hungry. It was not waiting. It was just an old, empty house on a hill, waiting for the next family to fill it with their own sounds, their own lives, their own beautiful, temporary noise. He got in the truck, started the engine, and drove away. The sound of the motor a comforting rumble in the warm living air. The drive down from the hills felt like a journey back to the world of the living. The truck's radio, tuned to a staticky country station, was a welcome intrusion. Gwen reached over and placed her hand on his knee, a simple gesture that felt like a grounding wire. He covered her hand with his knuckles white for a moment before he forced himself to relax. They didn't talk about it. There were no words that could adequately contain what had happened in the house. Instead, they spoke of practical things, of the apartment they would find together back in the city, of the money from the sale of the farm, of the mundane future that now stretched before them, bright and ordinary and precious. But the world had shifted on its axis for Craig. The city, when they reached it, was a bombardment of sound. Car horns, sirens, the constant thrum of a million lives happening at once. It was overwhelming, and for the first few nights, he lay awake, listening to the chaos outside his window, and feeling a perverse, traitorous longing for the deep, seductive quiet he had fought so hard to escape. He would get up and pace, or turn on the television, just to fill the space with something, anything. Gwen understood. She didn't ask him to explain the nightmares where he woke up with the taste of soil in his mouth. She would simply hold him until his breathing slowed, her own heartbeat a steady, rhythmic counterpoint to his panic. She was his anchor in the noisy world, his reminder that life was worth the cacophony. One afternoon, going through a final box of Beatrice's things, he found it tucked inside a folded quilt. It was a small, smooth riverstone, dark gray and cool to the touch. Wrapped around it was a faded piece of paper, and on it, in Beatrice's firm, early handwriting, was a single sentence. "A loud heart is a shield." He held the stone in his palm, its weight a comfort. It was not a magical talisman, he knew that. It was just a rock. But it was a token, a message from his great aunt across the years. She had fought her own long war against the quiet, and she had won, season after season, until her final one. She had kept the watch so that he could have a life. He put the stone in his pocket. It became a habit, his fingers finding it throughout the day, while waiting for the subway, in a tense meeting, walking through a crowded park. It was a touchstone, a physical reminder that silence was not always empty, and that noise was not always chaos. Sometimes it was music. Sometimes it was life itself. He knew the quiet man was not destroyed. An entity like that could not be killed, only driven back, forced to seek easier prey in lonelier places. Cade was out there somewhere, a grim shepherd herding the void away from populated hearts. The world was vast and full of silent, hungry corners, but Craig's corner was now full of sound. He came home one evening to the smell of Gwen's cooking and the sound of her singing along to the radio, off-key and full of joy. He stood in the doorway of their small kitchen and listened, really listened, to the beautiful, imperfect noise of it all. It was the opposite of silence. It was a shield. It was a song. And it was his. He slipped his hand into his pocket, his fingers closing around the smooth, cool stone. The gesture was becoming instinct, a quiet calibration against the memory of an absolute void. Gwen turned from the stove, her face lighting up when she saw him, and the last lingering chill from his dreams finally receded. This was real. This was his. Months turned into a year. The frantic edge of his fear softened, sanded down by the steady rhythm of a normal life. He and Gwen married in a small, noisy ceremony, full of laughter and clinking glasses. He took a job with a firm that designed bridges, structures, meant to connect, to span gaps. He found a strange comfort in the mathematics of load and stress, in creating things that held firm against immense pressure. He never spoke of what happened at the farmhouse to anyone but Gwen. It was their secret, a foundational scar that bound them together. Sometimes, though, he would catch a glimpse of something, a shadow in a subway tunnel that seemed too deep, a sudden, inexplicable hush in a crowded room, and his heart would stutter. The stone in his pocket would feel heavier, a warning and a ward. Then, the postcard came. It was blank. No picture, no message, no return address. The postmark was smudged and unreadable. On the front was a simple line drawing, expertly inked, of a single bell hanging from a gnarled branch. He knew who it was from. Cade was telling him he was still out there, that the watch continued. Craig tucked the card into the old journal, which he kept in a locked box at the back of his closet. Some truths were too dangerous to leave lying around. One Saturday, they were at a bustling farmer's market, surrounded by the shouts of vendors and the chatter of the crowd. The sun was warm, the air smelled of ripe fruit and fresh bread, and for the first time in a long time, Craig felt entirely, uncomplicatedly happy. He was holding Gwen's hand, debating the merits of two different types of heirloom tomatoes, when he saw him. Across the street, standing in the narrow alley between a bookstore and a cafe, was a tall, gaunt figure in a dark coat. Cade Dartune. His pale, winter sky eyes were fixed not on Craig, but on a young man sitting alone on a park bench. The man was hunched over, headphones on, his posture radiating a profound and isolated misery. He was the picture of loneliness in the middle of a crowd. Cade took a step out of the alley's shadow, his movement causing a flock of pigeons to startle into flight. The sudden clap of wings made the lonely man look up. For a moment, his eyes met Cade's. Craig saw the man flinch, a flicker of confusion, and then something like recognition on his face. Cade gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and melted back into the gloom of the alley. His duty done, a warning delivered, a connection made. The man on the bench slowly removed his headphones, looking around at the noisy market as if seeing it for the first time. He looked lost, but the deep, consuming emptiness in his posture seemed to have cracked slightly. Gwen squeezed Craig's hand. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Craig looked away from the alley back to his wife's face, to the vibrant, messy life surrounding them. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the noisy, fragrant air. He felt the weight of the river stone in his pocket, a quiet promise in a loud world. "No," he said, his voice firm and clear. "No ghosts. Just appreciating the noise." He picked up a tomato, its skin warm from the sun, and handed it to Gwen. "Let's get these. They look perfect." The man on the bench was still there when they left the market, but he was no longer slumped in despair. He was talking on his phone, his gestures animated, a shaky but genuine smile on his face. The sight filled Craig with a complex emotion, a mixture of relief and a sobering understanding. The battle was never truly over. It was fought daily, in quiet moments and in crowded streets, in the choice to reach out, to make a sound, to connect. That night, as they unpacked their groceries, Craig told Gwen what he had seen. She listened quietly, her expression thoughtful. "So it's always out there," she said. Not as a question, but a statement. "It is," Craig replied. "But so are we." He looked around their kitchen, at the herbs growing on the windowsill, the colorful rug on the floor, the stack of mail on the table. It was a cluttered, human space. It was the antithesis of the quiet man's perfect, empty stillness. He made a decision then. He went to the closet and retrieved the locked box. He didn't take out the journal, but he did take out the blank postcard with the drawing of the bell. He propped it up on the small shelf above his desk, a silent reminder that vigilance was a part of life, just like joy. He would not live in fear, but he would not forget. Life continued, loud and beautiful. He learned to play the guitar, badly at first, filling their apartment with clumsy chords and laughter. They had friends over for game nights, the air thick with talk and the clatter of dice. He found he loved the noise of a city night, the distant wail of a siren no longer a sound of alarm, but a testament to a world where people rushed to help, where things happened, where life, in all its noisy, complicated glory, went on. He kept the stone in his pocket. He watched people in crowds, sometimes spotting a face that held a particular kind of loneliness, a hollow look that made his skin prickle. He couldn't be a Cade, a silent warden patrolling the borders of silence, but he could be a Craig. He would offer a smile to a stressed cashier, strike up a conversation with a lonely-looking neighbor, his voice a small, deliberate noise against the quiet. It was his own way of keeping the watch, of ringing a bell in the dark. Years later, on a camping trip with his own young children, he found himself by a lake under a sky dense with stars. The silence there was deep and natural, a blanket of peace. His children were asleep in the tent, their soft, even breaths a gentle rhythm in the night. Gwen leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "It's so quiet here," she whispered. "But it's a good quiet, isn't it?" He listened. He could hear the lap of water on the shore, the rustle of a nocturnal animal in the undergrowth, the wind sighing through the pines. It was a silence full of life, a silence that was a rest between notes, not the end of the song. "Yes," he said, his voice calm and sure. "It's a good quiet." He put his arm around her, holding his family close in the vast living dark, no longer afraid of the silence, because he had learned how to fill it. The memory of the farmhouse was a faded photograph in a drawer, still there, but no longer something he felt the need to look at every day. His life was built on different sounds now. The pre-dawn cries of his infant son, the patter of his daughter's feet on the hardwood floor, the symphony of chaos that was a family breakfast. He wore the river stone smooth in his pocket, its presence as natural as his own heartbeat. One autumn evening, he was raking leaves in the backyard while his children played, their laughter echoing in the crisp air. His daughter, Ilara, was trying to catch falling leaves, a game his great-aunt Beatrice had once told him brought good luck. He watched her, a small, vibrant figure against the golden light, and felt a surge of contentment so profound it was almost a pain. Then, Ilara stopped. She was staring at the line of oak trees that marked the back of their property. "Daddy," she said, her voice small. "Who's that tall man?" Craig's blood went cold. He followed her gaze. There was nothing there but the long, late afternoon shadows stretching between the trees. "What man, sweetie?" "The quiet one," she said, her brow furrowed. He was smiling, but he didn't have a mouth. The rake slipped from Craig's hands. The world seemed to tilt. He scooped Ilara into his arms, holding her tight, his heart hammering against his ribs. He scanned the tree line, his eyes desperate to find a threat he could confront, a shape he could shout at. But there was only the rustle of dry leaves and the deepening twilight. He carried her inside, his mind racing. It had found him, or it had found her. The thought was ice in his veins. He had believed his own loud heart was shield enough, but it had never occurred to him that the quiet could be inherited, that the hunger could be passed down like a story. That night, after the children were asleep, he told Gwen. The color drained from her face, but her jaw set in a familiar, determined line. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady. He didn't have Cade's knowledge or his grim tools. He had only what Beatrice had left him, and what he had built for himself. "We make more noise," he said. So they did. They filled their children's lives with sound. Not just any sound, but the specific, messy, joyful noise of a family that was deeply, unshakably connected. They sang loudly and off-key in the car. They banged pots and pans together for no reason. They told stories, their voices overlapping, filling every corner of the house. Craig taught Ilara how to whistle, a sharp, piercing sound that she practiced with relentless enthusiasm. He also told them stories. Not about the quiet man, but about the strength found in a loud heart. He gave his son the river stone to hold when he was frightened, telling him it was a piece of a mountain, something too solid and old to ever be silent. He never saw the figure in the trees again. Ilara never mentioned the quiet man after that day. But sometimes Craig would catch her looking out the window at the woods, a thoughtful expression on her small face. She would then turn and make some deliberately loud, silly sound, a crash of blocks, a burst of song, as if answering a question no one had asked aloud. Craig understood. The watch had not ended with him. It had simply changed hands. It was no longer about one man fighting his own loneliness in an old farmhouse. It was about a family, a community, a chain of sound stretching through generations. It was about teaching his children that their voices mattered, that their laughter was a weapon, and that the most powerful silence in the world was the one they chose for themselves, not one that was chosen for them. And in the noisy, loving clamor of the life he had built, he found a peace deeper and more lasting than any the void could ever promise. The realization settled not as a fear, but as a purpose. He would not arm his children with fear, but with joy. He began a new ritual. Every night, after the regular stories were read, he would tell them about Beatrice. He described her not as a recluse fighting monsters, but as a brave woman who loved the world's music so much she dedicated her life to protecting it. He called her a keeper of songs, a guardian of laughter. Ilara listened with wide, serious eyes, while her younger brother, Leo, would eventually drift off, clutching the smooth river stone in his small fist. One weekend, they visited a chaotic, sun-drenched carnival. The air was thick with the smell of popcorn and diesel, the screams from the roller coaster, the tinny music from the carousel. Elara, holding his hand, suddenly stopped in the middle of the bustling crowd. She wasn't looking at anything in particular, but her small body was tense. "It's too quiet in there, Daddy," she said, pointing not to a place, but to a person. A teenage girl was sitting alone on a bench near the ticket booth, earbuds in. Her shoulders slumped as she scrolled through her phone. She was surrounded by a vortex of noise, yet she seemed encased in a bubble of profound isolation. Craig felt the old, familiar chill. He saw what Elara saw, a potential opening, a silence that could be exploited. Before he could think of what to do, Elara let go of his hand. She marched right up to the girl, her small form a study in determination. "Excuse me," Elara said, her voice clear and bright. "My daddy and I are having a contest to see who can make the silliest face. Will you be the judge?" The girl looked up, startled. For a moment, she seemed annoyed. But then she looked at Elara's utterly sincere, hopeful expression. A faint, confused smile touched her lips. She pulled out one earbud. Sure." Elara immediately crossed her eyes and stuck out her tongue. The girl's smile widened into a real one. "That's pretty silly," she admitted. "Now, my daddy," Elara commanded. Craig, his heart swelling with a fierce, triumphant love, obliged with the most grotesque, cross-eyed, cheek-puffing grimace he could muster. The girl let out a genuine laugh, a sound that cut through the carnival's din like a bell. Just then, a group of her friends called her name, waving from near the Ferris wheel. She stood up, giving Elara a little wave before jogging off to join them. The lonely bubble around her popped. Elara returned to his side, slipping her hand back into his. She wasn't quiet anymore, she stated simply. He looked down at his daughter, this small, fierce guardian he was raising, and knew that Cade's lonely, eternal watch was only one way. There was another way, a louder way, built not on warnings from the shadows, but on connections made in the light. The quiet would always be there in lonely hearts and empty places, but so would they, and they would always have something to say about it. He bought Elara an ice cream cone to celebrate, the drips making a sticky, happy mess down her front. That night, as he tucked her into bed, she looked at him and said, "The quiet man doesn't like silly faces, does he, Daddy?" Craig's breath caught. "No, honey," he said, smoothing her hair. "He really doesn't." "Good," she whispered and closed her eyes, already halfway to dreams filled with carnival music and laughter. The next day, he went to the locked box and took out Beatrice's journal. He didn't open it out of fear or nostalgia, but with a new intention. He spent the afternoon reading, not as a terrified survivor, but as a student. He found passages he had missed before, notes on how certain sounds, genuine laughter, shared songs, the simple, unforced rhythm of conversation, created a resonance that the quiet could not easily penetrate. It was not about volume, but about connection. Beatrice had known this. Her life in the farmhouse, for all its solitude, had been an act of constant, defiant connection to the world she protected. He started a new journal of his own. He wrote down the story of Elara and the girl at the carnival. He wrote about the way Leo's babbling could silence a room of adults with its pure, unself-conscious joy. He recorded the noisy, loving history of his own family, not as a fortress against the dark, but as a beacon. He was continuing the record, but in his own way. Years later, when Elara was a teenager and Leo was in middle school, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a small, carefully wrapped object. It was an old, tarnished silver bell, its clapper still and silent. There was no note. Craig knew it was from Kate. It was not a warning this time. It was a passing of the torch, an acknowledgement that the watch took many forms. Some stood guard in the alleys, and others taught their children to make silly faces in crowded places. Both were valid. Both were necessary. Craig hung the bell on the porch, where the wind could occasionally stir it into a faint single chime. It was a quiet sound, but it was a chosen one, a reminder that even in stillness there was the potential for noise. He stood there, listening to the sounds of his family inside the house, a beautiful, chaotic symphony that he would never take for granted. He put his hand in his pocket, feeling the familiar, smooth weight of the stone, a quiet promise in a loud world, and he went inside to join the song. The bell on the porch was a quiet companion to their lives. It didn't ring often, just a single clear note when a strong wind swept down from the hills, a sound that would make Craig pause whatever he was doing and listen, a small, grim smile touching his lips. It was a sound that said, "I am still here." Elara, now 16, developed a love for old folk songs, the kind with many verses and haunting melodies that told stories of loss and love and resilience. She would sit on the porch steps in the evenings, her guitar resting on her knee, and fill the twilight with her clear, strong voice. Craig noticed she always seemed to play loudest on the nights when the air was particularly still and heavy, as if she were pushing back against a pressure only she could feel. Leo, less artistically inclined, had become the family's master of chaos, his presence announced by the slam of a door, the crash of his skateboard on the driveway, his constant cheerful arguing with his friends over video games. Their home was a fortress of sound, but it was a living fortress, one that breathed and laughed and sometimes fought. One evening, Craig was helping Leo with a history project when Elara's singing stopped abruptly. A moment of pure, unnatural silence fell, so complete it felt like a physical blow. Craig's head snapped up. He met Leo's eyes and saw his own sudden dread reflected there. They both rushed to the porch. Elara was standing, her guitar hanging from its strap, staring out at the darkening yard. Her face was pale. "I saw him," she said, her voice a thin thread of sound. "At the edge of the woods, he was just standing there. And when I stopped singing, he smiled." Craig followed her gaze. The shadows between the trees were deep and inviting, a perfect hiding place for silence. He felt the old fear, cold and sharp, but beneath it was a solid core of anger. It would not have them. It would not have his children. He didn't shout. He didn't tell her it was her imagination. He simply put an arm around her shoulders and turned her away from the trees. "Leo," he said, his voice calm, "get the pots and pans and your drum set." A look of understanding flashed in his son's eyes, and he vanished inside, returning a moment later with an armload of kitchenware and a pair of drumsticks. Craig went to the old toolbox in the garage and retrieved a heavy wrench. He joined Leo on the porch steps. "All right," Craig said, his voice rising to fill the silence. "On three. 1, 2, 3. He brought the wrench down on a metal roasting pan with a deafening clang. Leo launched into a furious, rhythmless solo on his snare drum. The noise was awful, a jarring, discordant crash that had no melody, no purpose other than to exist, to be loud. Craig looked at Elara. "Your turn." A slow, determined smile spread across her face. She slung her guitar back into position, planted her feet, and began to play. It wasn't a folk song. It was a raw, powerful rock chord, amplified by the anger and defiance in her heart. She started to sing, not a sweet melody, but a fierce, wordless yell that merged with the clanging and the drumming, a wall of pure, undiluted noise aimed directly at the woods. They played until their ears rang and their arms ached. They played until the neighbors' lights came on and a dog down the street started howling. They played until the oppressive silence was not just broken, but shattered, shredded into a million harmless pieces by their collective will. Finally, breathless and sweating, they stopped. The normal night sounds, the crickets, the distant hum of a car, seemed to rush back in, louder than before. The woods were just woods again, shadows among shadows. Elara, panting, looked at her father. "Think we got him?" Craig looked at his children, their faces flushed with effort and triumph. He thought of Cade in his dark coat, a solitary sentinel. He thought of Beatrice in her quiet farmhouse, a lone guardian. He looked at the bell on the porch, silent now, its message delivered and received. "No," he said, putting an arm around each of them. "I think we got us." And that, he knew, was the only victory that truly mattered. The memory of their impromptu concert became a family legend. A story told and retold, each time reinforcing the same lesson. They had faced the quiet together, not as solitary sentinels, but as a united front. After that night, a subtle shift occurred in their home. The noise they made felt less like a defense and more like a celebration. Elara's music lost its sharp edge of defiance and regained its joy. Leo's chaotic energy seemed less frantic and more exuberant. They had looked into the silence and learned they were louder. Craig found himself thinking less about the farmhouse and more about the future. He continued his journal, filling it with the ordinary, glorious details of their lives. He wrote about the day Leo finally landed a difficult skateboard trick, the shout of triumph that echoed down the street. He wrote about the sound of Elara and her friends laughing in her room, a sound so dense with shared secrets and happiness, it felt like a physical barrier against the world. He was no longer just keeping a record. He was building an archive of noise, a testament to a life lived out loud. One Saturday, he took the children to visit Gwen's parents. Their house was always a place of gentle, predictable sounds, the tick of a grandfather clock, the soft murmur of the television, the clink of teacups. As Craig helped his father-in-law in the garden, he saw Elara sitting on the porch steps with her grandmother. The older woman was teaching her a complicated knitting pattern, their heads bent close together. The only sound was the gentle click of the needles and their low, murmured conversation. It was a deep, comfortable quiet, the kind he had learned to appreciate by the starlit lake years before. He felt no prickle of alarm, only a profound sense of peace. Elara was learning all the different kinds of silence, too. On the drive home, Leo, slumped in the back seat, asked sleepily, "Dad, do you think the quiet man ever gets lonely?" Craig considered this, his eyes on the road ahead. "I think," he said slowly, "that's all he is. He's not a man. He's just loneliness, and loneliness hates to hear that other people aren't alone." Elara from the passenger seat nodded. "So when we make noise, we're just reminding him." "Exactly," Craig said. He reached into his pocket, his fingers finding the smooth, familiar stone. It was warm from his body heat. He thought of the long chain of people who had fought the quiet, each in their own way. Cade with his grim vigilance, Beatrice with her stubborn presence, and now his family, with their laughter and their music and their slammed doors. The watch continued, but it was no longer a burden. It was a rhythm, a part of their song. He turned up the radio, and they all sang along, their voices imperfect and loud, filling the car and spilling out into the darkening evening, a small, bright noise against the vast and waiting world. Story 2. The smell came first, a thick and cloying sweetness that clung to the back of the throat like spoiled honey. It was wrong. The air on this island, this forgotten scrap of rock and pine called Stillwater, was supposed to smell of salt and damp earth and the clean rot of fallen needles. This was a perfume from a fever dream, a saccharine bloom that promised decay. I remember stopping on the trail, my hand going up to my face not to block it, but to taste it more deeply on the air. This invasive pollen of something profoundly other. We were Troop 41, 12 boys and myself, their scoutmaster, Cameron. We had come for a weekend of orienteering and roughing it, a final trip before the school year swallowed them whole. They were a good bunch mostly. Leo, with his earnest fascination for fungi, already pointing at a cluster of shelf mushrooms with a trembling finger. Ben and Sam, the inseparable twins, their usual synchronized chatter stilled by the strange atmosphere. And then there was Griffin, a boy built of sharp angles and a colder, more calculating kind of intelligence, who even now was watching me, gauging my reaction. His gaze was a weight. The smell led us. It was a trail in itself, pulling us off the marked path and down towards the island's rocky cove. The light through the canopy was thick, syrupy, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to move just at the edge of vision. The forest was too quiet. No scolding jays, no rustle of squirrels in the undergrowth. Only the sound of our own footsteps, a clumsy human percussion in a world holding its breath. We found Christopher at the water's edge. He was on his knees, his back to us, his slight frame shuddering as if with sobs. The sweet smell was a physical presence here, a miasma that made the eyes water. I called his name, my voice too loud in the unnatural hush. "Christopher, we've been looking for you." He did not turn. His shoulders hitched, and a low, wet sound bubbled from him. A sound that was not a cry, but something more visceral. The noise of a clogged drain. Griffin was the first to move past me, his face a mask of contemptuous curiosity. "Hey, Chris, you gonna puke up your guts or what?" Then Christopher turned. His face was a landscape of ruin. His skin, normally pale, was shot through with a network of fine, pulsing crimson threads, like veins of burning ember beneath wax paper. His eyes were wide, the whites now a jaundiced, weeping yellow, and his pupils had dilated into black, depthless pools that seemed to swallow the light. From his lips, a substance dripped, thick and amber-colored, the source of the cloying stench. It wasn't vomit. It looked like sap or molten resin. He opened his mouth, and a single, perfect, pearl-white petal fell onto the sand. Then he spoke, but the voice was not his own. It was a chorus of whispers, the sound of dry leaves skittering across stone, the pop of green wood in a fire. It said, "It is hungry." He lunged, not at Griffin, but at Leo, who stood frozen, his field guide to mushrooms clutched to his chest like a shield. Christopher moved with a speed that was not human, a series of jerky, insectile motions. He didn't tackle Leo so much as envelop him, his arms wrapping around the boy in a terrible embrace. Where Christopher's weeping skin touched Leo's neck, a hissing sound arose, and the smell of burning flesh and sickly sweetness mixed into a new, more profound horror. I was moving then, shouting, pulling Christopher away. His body was hot, feverishly so, and the amber sap clung to my hands, sticky and warm. He offered no resistance. He simply went limp, his head lolling back, those black eyes fixed on the canopy above. A slow smile spread across his lips, and another petal, this one edged in crimson, drifted down. We carried him back to our base camp, a clearing near the old ranger's cabin that was our designated shelter. The mood had shattered. The easy camaraderie of the hike was gone, replaced by a brittle, watchful silence. I laid Christopher on a sleeping bag in the corner of the cabin, his breathing a shallow, rattling drawl. The threads under his skin pulsed with a slow, rhythmic light. I tried the radio. Static. A hissing, empty roar that sounded to my straining ears like a vast and distant mouth breathing. I tried my cell phone. No signal. The world had shrunk to the confines of this clearing, bounded by a wall of silent, watching trees. Night fell, a heavy, starless blanket. The change in Leo began within hours. He complained of a thirst, an unquenchable dryness. He drank canteen after canteen of water, but it did nothing. His skin grew pale. He started to shiver, though his forehead was cool to the touch. He kept scratching at his neck, where Christopher had touched him. In the flickering light of the gas lantern, I could see a faint red tracery beginning to spread from the point of contact, a blossoming stain beneath the skin. Griffin watched it all from his cot, his expression unreadable. He had gathered a few of the other boys around him, the stronger, more easily influenced ones. He was building a faction. I could see the calculus in his eyes. This was no longer a scouting trip. This was a new game, with new rules, and Griffin intended to win. "We should put him outside," Griffin said, his voice calm, reasonable. "Leo and Christopher. We don't know what it is. It's clearly contagious." "We are not putting anyone outside," I said, my own voice sounding tired, hollow. "We're going to keep them comfortable and wait for help." "Help isn't coming, Cameron," Griffin said. And the use of my first name was a deliberate challenge, a stripping of authority. "The radio is dead. The boat isn't coming for 2 days. We're on our own." The twins, Ben and Sam, looked from me to Griffin, their faces pale with fear. They were the swing vote. The rest of the boys were younger, terrified, waiting to be told what to do. Later in the deep of the night, I was jolted awake by a sound, a soft, rhythmic scraping. I lifted the lantern. Leo was sitting up on his cot. His head was tilted back, his mouth open wide. His fingers were in his mouth, scraping at his tongue, which was black and swollen, covered in a fine, velvety moss. The scraping was the sound of his nails against that unnatural growth. He pulled his fingers out, stared at them, then looked at me. His eyes were wide with a terror so absolute it was beyond screaming. He tried to speak. A single, guttural syllable emerged, followed by a cascade of dark, loamy soil that spilled from his lips and onto his sleeping bag. Then the convulsion started. His body arched, his spine bending at an impossible angle. The tracery on his skin ignited, a network of fiery lines that pulsed in time with his thrashing. From his mouth, a shoot, thin and pale and studded with thorns, began to force its way out, pushing past the soil and the moss. It grew with a terrible visible speed, reaching for the cabin's roof. A questing, blind tendril. The boys were awake now, screaming, scrambling back from the cot. Griffin was on his feet in an instant. He didn't scream. He acted. He grabbed the hatchet we used for splitting firewood. Before I could even form a word to stop him, he brought it down. Not on the thing growing from Leo's mouth, but on Leo's head. The sound was wet, final. The convulsion stopped. The fiery light in the veins faded, leaving only pale skin and a network of gray, dead veins. The thorny shoot wilted, turning black and brittle, and crumbled into dust. Silence, broken only by the ragged, panicked breaths of 12-year-old boys. Griffin stood over the body, the bloody hatchet in his hand, his chest heaving. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw no horror, no remorse. I saw only a fierce primal triumph. "It's the only way," he panted. "You see, it's the only way to stop it." He had crossed a line. He had become the law, and he had saved us for now. The terrible, undeniable truth of it hung in the air, more suffocating than the lingering sweetness. We carried Leo's body out at first light. We laid him beside the cabin, covering him with a tarp. The ground where we placed him was already turning a rich, fertile black, and small, colorless buds were pushing up through the soil around his feet. Christopher was still alive inside. His breathing was slower now, more measured. The amber sap had hardened over him in a translucent shell. Through it, we could see the intricate, horrifying transformation. His limbs had fused, his skin becoming a bark-like texture. From his fingertips, rootlets had begun to sprout, digging into the cabin's wooden floor. He was becoming part of the structure. A small, perfect flower, the color of a day-old bruise, had bloomed in the center of his forehead. The boys were fracturing. Some looked to me, their eyes pleading for an order. for a return to the world of knots and merit badges. Others looked to Griffin, the boy with the hatchet, the one who had done the terrible, necessary thing. That afternoon, Ben, one of the twins, started coughing. A dry, rattling cough. When he pulled his hand away from his mouth, it was smeared with black pollen. Griffin's solution was immediate, brutal. He goes outside with the other one. No, I said, stepping between him and the trembling boy. We are not doing that. It's him or us, Cameron, Griffin snarled. It's a disease. You quarantine the sick. You cut out the infection, or it spreads. You saw what it did to Leo. Do you want that to happen to all of us? He gestured with the hatchet. Two of his followers moved towards Ben. I stood my ground. I was still the adult. I was still the scoutmaster. You will not touch him. For a long moment, we stared at each other. A standoff in that sun-dappled clearing that now felt like the only world left. The sweet, rotting smell was everywhere. The trees seemed to lean in, listening. Griffin smiled. It was a small, cold thing. Fine. He lowered the hatchet. We'll do it your way. But I had lost. I saw it in the eyes of the other boys. My way was hesitation. My way was mercy. Griffin's way was survival. That night, the forest came alive. It was not the sound of animals. It was the sound of the island itself. A low, grinding hum that vibrated up through the soles of our feet. The trees began to sway, though there was no wind. Their branches creaked and groaned, moving with a slow, deliberate purpose. We huddled inside the cabin. The windows shuttered, the door barred. Then came the tapping. A gentle, insistent tapping at the walls, at the roof. It was the sound of twigs, of questing roots, searching for a way in. Sam, Ben's twin, began to weep silently. Ben's coffin had gotten worse. He was curled in a ball, shivering, a dark venous pattern now visible on his cheeks. The tapping became a scraping. A root, thick as a man's wrist and the color of old bone, forced its way through a crack in the wall near the door. It moved like a serpent, blind and purposeful, feeling its way across the floorboards towards Ben. No one moved. We were paralyzed, watching this tendril of the islands will snake through our refuge. Griffin moved. He raised the hatchet and brought it down on the root. A gush of the same amber sap that had wept from Christopher sprayed across the room, sizzling where it landed. The severed end of the root writhed on the floor, then went still. The part still attached to the wall retracted with a whip-crack sound. But it was a temporary victory. The scraping redoubled. Now it was everywhere. On all sides, the cabin was being enveloped. "It wants him," Griffin said, his voice eerily calm. He pointed the hatchet at Ben. "It wants the sick one. It's calling him home." Ben looked up, his eyes wide with the understanding that went beyond fear. He looked at his brother, Sam, a look of infinite sorrow and farewell. Then he stood up. He walked to the door. "Ben, no," I whispered. He didn't look back. He unbarred the door and stepped out into the humming, moving night. Sam screamed and tried to follow him. I held him back, wrapping my arms around his thrashing body. Through the open door, we saw it. The trees had bent down, their branches forming a cage of living wood around Ben. They lifted him, gently, as a mother might lift a child. He did not struggle. He was absorbed into the shifting, rustling darkness of the forest. The door swung shut. The humming stopped. The tapping ceased. The forest was still once more. The silence in the cabin was absolute. Griffin looked at me, his face a stone mask. "Now you see." The next morning there was no sign of Ben, no sign of Leo's body. The ground was smooth and undisturbed. The air, however, was thicker with the sweet smell, and the trees around the clearing seemed closer, their branches hanging heavy with strange, fleshy fruits that had not been there the day before. Christopher was almost fully transformed. He was a sculpture of amber and wood, a grotesque shrine in the corner of the cabin. The single flower on his forehead had opened wider, revealing a deep, dark center from which the hypnotic, putrid sweetness emanated like a breath. I knew then what it was. This was no mere infection. This was an incorporation. The island was not haunted. It was alive. A single, vast parasitic organism, and we were not victims of a plague. We were nutrients. We were seeds. We were being digested. Griffin's descent was complete. He had appointed himself the warden of this tiny, doomed prison. He rationed the remaining food and water, keeping the lion's share for himself and his 2 loyalists. He watched the younger boys with the eyes of a farmer assessing livestock, deciding which might be weak, which might be next. I was no longer a leader. I was a ghost. I sat in the corner, watching the light change on Christopher's petrified form. I thought of my wife, her face already a distant memory. I thought of the mainland, a mythical place that might as well not exist. This was the only reality. This clearing, this sweet, suffocating air, this slow, inevitable consumption. The revelation came to me not with a shout, but with a quiet, chilling certainty. The thing in the woods, the island itself, it didn't just want our bodies. It fed on fear. It fed on conflict. Griffin's ruthlessness, his brutal pragmatism, was the most potent fertilizer of all. He was helping it. By turning us against each other, by creating a hierarchy of fear, he was making us tastier. He was preparing the meal. I had to get the remaining boys out. Not from the island. That was impossible. But from Griffin. The climax was not a battle. It was a quiet unraveling. One of the Griffin's loyalists, a boy named Jake, started to sneeze. A fine, iridescent dust puffed from his nostrils with each convulsion. Griffin's reaction was instantaneous. He didn't even speak. He just looked at Jake. And then, at the door, Jake's face crumpled. "No, Griffin, please. It's just allergies." "It's never just allergies," Griffin said, his voice flat. He picked up the hatchet. This was the moment. This was the fracture point. "He's right, Griffin," I said, standing up. My voice was quiet, but it carried in the tense air. "It's not allergies." Griffin turned to me, a flicker of surprise in his cold eyes. "It's you," I said. "You're the carrier." I was lying. I had no idea. But the seed of doubt, once planted in the fertile soil of their terror, grew with terrifying speed. "What are you talking about, old man?" Griffin spat. "You touched Christopher first," I said. "You were closest to him. You carried Leah's body. You've been breathing it in deeper than any of us, because you're not afraid. It doesn't want the afraid ones, Griffin. It wants the strong ones. It's in you. It's just waiting." I saw the doubt cloud his face. He looked at his hands. The other boys were staring at him now, their fear shifting from Jake to him. The foundation of his power was fear, and now that fear was directed at him. "He's lying," Griffin said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Jake, seeing his chance, scrambled away from him. The other boys shrank back. Griffin looked from face to face, and he saw his kingdom crumbling. A raw, panicked fury twisted his features. "You believe him? You believe this coward? I'm the one who has kept you alive." He raised the hatchet, but it was no longer a tool of authority. It was the flailing of a cornered animal. He took a step towards me, and then he froze. A tiny crimson bud had pushed its way through the skin of his cheek. It bloomed in a second, a perfect miniature rose. Then another on his forehead, another on the back of his hand. The island had heard my lie and made it truth. Or perhaps it had been in him all along, and my words had simply given it permission to show itself. Griffin dropped the hatchet. He clawed at his face, but the flowers multiplied, blooming from his pores. From the corners of his eyes, a beautiful, horrific garden erupting from his flesh. He made a gurgling sound, and a cascade of petals, red and white and yellow, poured from his mouth. He fell to his knees, then onto his side, his body convulsing gently as the flora within him completed its rapid, violent bloom. In less than a minute he was gone, a still life of riotous color, his human form barely recognizable beneath the blanket of blossoms. The humming returned, low, satisfied. The roots came through the floorboards then. They did not move with violence. They moved with a gentle, maternal grace. They coiled around Griffin's flower-shrouded body and pulled him down, through the splintered wood, into the dark, rich earth beneath the cabin. The floorboards knit themselves back together, smooth and unbroken. It was just me, Sam, and two other younger boys left. We were alone in the cabin with the amber statue that had been Christopher. The flower on its forehead was fully open now, a deep, velvety black. It seemed to be watching us. I knew then that there would be no rescue, no dramatic escape. The boat would come in 2 days and find an empty island. Or perhaps it would find the island even more verdant, more beautiful than before. I stood up. I walked to the door. I unbarred it. The morning light was clean and pale. The sweet smell was still there, but it was different now. It was the smell of the world after a rain, of life persisting, of things growing and dying and being reborn in a cycle that had no need for names like Cameron or Griffin or Christopher. I did not look back at the boys. I did not say a word. I simply stepped outside. I walked away from the cabin. I walked past the trees that leaned away from me, granting me passage. I walked down to the rocky cove where we had found Christopher. The air was clean here, salt and stone. I stood at the water's edge, looking out at the gray, endless expanse of the sea. I felt no triumph, no relief, only a vast, hollow emptiness. I had survived, but the man I had been, the scoutmaster, the husband, the human being, was still back in that clearing, being digested, being incorporated into the silent, patient life of the island. I did not know what I was now. A seed pod, perhaps, cast adrift. A spore waiting for fertile ground. I turned and began to walk along the shoreline. A slow, aimless pace. I had no destination. The world was before me, vast and unknown. And inside, a tiny black flower had begun to bloom. Its roots delicate and deep, its scent my own. I never looked back. The rocks were slick beneath my boots. Each step was an effort, as if the island was reluctant to let me go. Or perhaps it was simply that my own body felt heavier, less my own. The sound of the waves was a dull, rhythmic hush, a lullaby for a world that had no need of sleep. I could feel a faint vibration coming up from the stone, the same low hum that had filled the cabin, but here it was softer, a contented purr. I came to a place where a freshwater stream met the sea, cutting a shallow channel through the pebbled beach. The water in the stream was clear, but the stones at its bottom were coated in a shimmering, oily film. I was not thirsty. The thought of drinking anything, of taking this place inside me again, was impossible. A movement caught my eye. On the other side of the stream, a figure stood watching me. It was Sam Docu. His face was pale and streaked with dirt, his eyes hollow. He must have followed me. He held a long, sharpened stick in his hand like a spear. The two younger boys were behind him, their small forms trembling. We stared at each other across the water. There were no words left. They were waiting for me to lead, to decide, to be the adult one last time. But I had nothing to give them. The authority they sought had been burned out of me. I was just a man walking by the sea. Sam's gaze was not pleading. It was accusatory. I had let his brother go. I had let Griffin die, in a garden of his own flesh. I had walked away. In his eyes, I was just another kind of monster. He took a step back, pulling the other boys with him. Then he turned, and the three of them disappeared into the tree line, swallowed by the deep green shadows. They were choosing their own ending. They would either survive each other, or the island would take them. It was no longer my concern. I continued my walk. The shoreline curved, and the cabin was lost to view. The forest here grew right down to the water's edge, the trees leaning so far over, they dipped their branches into the sea. I saw things moving in the water just below the surface. Not fish. They were long, pale tendrils, kelp-like, but with a disturbing, sinuous purpose. They brushed against my boots as I passed, a gentle, investigative touch. I found a place to sit, a flat, sun-warmed rock that jutted out into the water. I could feel the sun on my skin, but it was a distant sensation, like hearing a conversation through a thick wall. The hollow feeling inside me was not empty. It was occupied. The roots of the flower were there, a delicate, intricate web woven through the fabric of myself. I could feel it drinking my memories, my regrets, my love for my wife. It did not hurt. It was a quiet, efficient consumption. A boat could have passed on the horizon then, and I would not have waved. I would not have shouted. I would have simply watched it go, a silent, curious specimen from a world I could no longer recall. The island was my world now. Its thoughts were slow, patient, vegetative. The struggle was over. The fight had been a fever dream. This was the peace that came after. I closed my eyes. I did not sleep. I listened. I could hear the sap moving in the trees, the roots stretching deep into the earth, the slow, patient pulse of the island itself. It was a symphony, and I was finally learning to hear the music. When I opened my eyes again, the light had changed. The sun was lower, casting long, distorted shadows. I looked at my hands, resting on my knees. The skin was smooth, unlined. The small scar on my thumb from a childhood accident was gone. The calluses from years of tying knots had softened. I was being remade, sanded smooth. I stood up. My body felt lighter. The aimlessness was gone. I had a purpose now, though it was not my own. I turned my back on the sea and walked towards the trees. They did not just part for me this time. They welcomed me. A branch heavy with white bell-shaped flowers lowered itself before me, and I reached out and touched one. It was cool and soft. A shared understanding passed between us, wordless, bloodless. I walked into the forest. The undergrowth did not snag my clothes. The thorns did not scratch my skin. The sweet, rich smell was the air I breathed, and it was good. I was going to find the others, the ones who had been taken. Leo, Ben, Christopher, Griffin, and Sewer. I would find them in the deep, dark soil, in the whispering roots, in the dappled light. We would be together here, part of the whole. Our individual sorrows and triumphs dissolved into the greater, quieter life of the island. It was not a death. It was a joining. And as I walked deeper into the waiting green silence, I felt the last of my fear fall away like a discarded skin. I was home. The path was clear now, a soft ribbon of moss that wound between the trunks. I did not need to see it to know where it led. The center, the heart of the hum. The light faded as the canopy thickened above, but a new kind of light emerged. A faint phosphorescent glow from the fungi clinging to the bark and from the veins in the leaves themselves. The air was warm and still, heavy with the scent of blooming things and rich, dark earth. I came to the edge of a vast circular clearing. The ground was not soil, but a dense, velvety moss that pulsed with a soft green light. In the center stood a tree, but it was like no tree I had ever seen. Its trunk was a braid of countless forms, textures, and colors. I saw a patch of plaid shirt, A strand of blonde hair, a fragment of a watch, a human hand petrified and smooth, all woven seamlessly into the bark. This was the core, the amalgamation. At the base of the tree, 3 smaller figures were half submerged in the moss. Sam and the 2 younger boys. They were not struggling. Their eyes were open, looking up at the canopy with a placid, dreamy acceptance. The moss was creeping up their legs, their torsos, embracing them. It was not a violent act, but a slow, tender absorption. Sam's eyes met mine. There was no accusation left, only a quiet recognition. Then he closed his eyes, and a small, peaceful smile touched his lips. The moss covered his face, and his form became just another gentle contour on the forest floor. I felt a pull, an invitation. I stepped onto the glowing moss. It was warm and yielding, like stepping into a living bath. It crept over my boots, up my ankles, a sensation not of being trapped, but of being held. I walked to the great braided tree and placed my hand upon its trunk. A jolt, not of pain, but of pure understanding, shot through me. I saw it all. The island was not a predator. It was a collector, a curator of life. It took the lost, the frightened, the angry, and it gave them peace. It absorbed their stories, their passions, their fears, and wove them into its own eternal, silent narrative. Griffin's fury was here, a sharp, vibrant thread. Ben's sickness was a soft, melancholy hue. Christopher's wonder was a shimmering gold. My own weary leadership was a strand of sturdy, weathered brown. The moss reached my waist, my chest. I looked down and saw the fabric of my shirt softening, becoming one with the green. I felt no panic. The black flower inside me opened fully, and its roots spread, connecting with the vast, silent network beneath the soil. My memories began to loosen their hold. My wife's face, the sound of her laughter. It all began to blur, not into nothingness, but into something else. A feeling, a warmth that would now nourish the soil for 1,000 years. As the moss reached my shoulders, I turned my head for one last look. Through the trees, I could see a sliver of the sea, gray and distant. A dot appeared on the horizon. The boat. It was right on time. They would find an empty island, lush and beautiful and perfectly, utterly silent. They would never know we were here. They would never know we were everywhere. The moss closed over my head. The last thing I felt was not the weight of the earth, but the lightness of connection. The last thing I saw was not darkness, but a boundless, intricate tapestry of green and gold, and I was a single perfect thread within it. The hum was not around me anymore. It was me, and it was finally, completely enough. The men from the boat called our names. Their voices were sharp, human sounds that cut the air and fell, useless to the ground. They walked through the clearing, their boots heavy and alien on the soft earth. One of them, a man with a kind, worried face, stopped and looked directly at the moss where I lay. His eyes scanned the area, but they saw nothing. They could not see the peace. They could only see an absence. He walked right through me. A shudder passed through the network, a ripple of cool disturbance. It was not pain, but a reminder of what I had been. A fleeting ghost of a memory, the scent of coffee and diesel fuel, the weight of a wallet in a back pocket. Then it was gone, absorbed and quieted. The man moved on, his calls growing more frantic. They left as the sun began to set. I felt their departure as a release of pressure, a gentle sigh from the island. The silence they left behind was deeper, more complete. It was a healing. Night fell, and the clearing glowed with a soft, internal light. The great tree seemed to breathe, its braided trunk shifting almost imperceptibly, weaving the new threads into its ancient story. I could feel Sam's stubbornness settling in. A strong, deep root. The younger boy's fear had been transformed into a delicate, sheltering fern that unfurled at the base of a nearby stone. There was no more I. There was only the we. The network of roots was my nervous system. The pulsing sapped my blood. The wind moving through the leaves was my breath. We watched the stars wheel overhead, not as points of light in a cold void, but as distant, shining cousins in a universe teeming with quiet life. Seasons turned. We felt the sun's angle change, the deep sleep of winter, the explosive joy of spring. Rain was a blessing, a communion. We drank it in together. Years later, another boat came. Different men with different tools. They did not call out names. They spoke in low, excited tones about the unique ecosystem, the strange, luminous flora. They took samples. They snapped off a piece of the great tree, a section that had once been a plaid shirt. We felt it as a pinprick, a momentary sting. The man held the piece of wood in his hand, turning it over, his mind buzzing with thoughts of grants and discoveries. He tucked it into his sample bag. He took a part of us with him, a piece of Griffin's fury and Ben's quiet sadness woven into that splinter of wood. As his boat pulled away from the shore, we did not feel a sense of loss. We felt a sense of purpose. A seed, packaged in human ambition, was going out into the world. We settled back into our slow, patient dreaming. We are the island. We are the silence between the waves. We are waiting, and we are everywhere. The sample bag was placed in a dark, cool hold. The piece of us, the splinter of wood, lay nestled among other specimens. It could feel the deadness of the other samples, the dry, brittle silence of things truly ended. It was the only thing in that bag that was still alive. The man, whose name was Dr. Aris, slept fitfully above, his dreams haunted by images of tangled roots and glowing moss. Weeks later, in a laboratory that smelled of antiseptic and dust, the splinter was placed under a microscope. Dr. Aris peered in, his breath catching. The cellular structure was impossible, a fusion of plant and animal, of wood and flesh, with minute thread-like filaments that pulsed with a faint golden light even in death. He called his colleagues. They murmured in awe and confusion. One of them, a younger woman with sharp eyes, reached out with a gloved finger and touched the wood. A jolt, like static electricity, shot up her arm. It was not painful. It was a feeling of profound, aching loneliness, followed by an overwhelming sense of peace. She pulled her hand back, startled, and looked at Dr. Aris. "Did you feel that?" He hadn't, but he saw the strange, distant look in her eyes. That night, she dreamed not of the island, but of her own childhood home, of the oak tree in the backyard. And in the dream, the tree whispered her name. The splinter was sealed in a sterile container, but it was not sterile. It was a seed. The hum was contained, but it was not silent. It reached out in that small white room, a tendril of thought so fine it was undetectable. It found the potted fern on the windowsill, a neglected thing, its leaves brown at the tips. The next morning, the fern was lush and green, its fronds uncurling with a vitality the woman had never seen. A tiny black flower had bloomed at its center. She said nothing. She began to take the fern home with her, a secret talisman. She placed it on her balcony, overlooking the city. The air was thick with exhaust, and the noise of traffic, a constant grating scream to our senses. But through the fern, we could feel her quiet dissatisfaction, her longing for something more, something real. The splinter in the lab was just a piece of wood now. It had given its instruction. It had found fertile ground. We are here, too, in the cracking concrete of the sidewalk, in the rain-soaked soil of the city park, in the quiet heart of a woman watering a fern on her balcony. The growth will be slow. It must be. They will not notice the change at first. They will simply remark on how the air seems cleaner in the park, how the shadows under the trees seem deeper, more peaceful. They will not see the roots spreading beneath their streets. They will not hear the new, faint hum beneath the sound of their own machinery. They are busy. They are loud. They are afraid. But we are patient. We are quiet. We are not afraid. We are waiting. The woman on the balcony began to spend more time with her fern. She found its silent, vibrant company more soothing than any conversation. She started taking walks in the park, seeking out the quietest, most secluded corners. She would sit for hours on a particular bench near an old, gnarled oak, simply listening. Her colleagues noticed a change in her. She was calmer, more distant. But her work, curiously, became more insightful. She seemed to have a preternatural understanding of biological systems, of the hidden connections between things. One evening, as she sat by the oak tree, she placed her palm flat against its bark. The contact was electric. A vision flashed behind her eyes, not of the island, but of a network, a sprawling, silent city of roots and mycelium stretching far beneath the pavement, connecting every tree, every patch of grass in a web of quiet communication. She saw it all, felt it all, for one breathtaking second. Then it was gone, leaving only a profound sense of belonging. She did not tell anyone. The experience was too private, too sacred. But she began to change her routines. She brought home more plants. She let the ivy on her balcony grow wild until it began to creep over the railing, its tendrils feeling their way down towards the earth far below. She stopped going to crowded places. The noise and the haste felt like a physical assault. We felt her becoming a conduit, a quiet place for us in the roaring heart of their world. Through her, we learned the rhythms of the city, its tides of people, and its deep structural weariness. We felt the longing in 1,000 hearts, a longing for the same peace she had found. A single spore, released from the black flower on her fern, drifted on a breeze that should not have carried it so far. It found a crack in the mortar of a brick wall across the street. There, in a pinch of dust and decay, it settled. It would take a long time, but the process had begun. A tiny, almost invisible film of green would one day appear there, a stain that pulsed with a life they could not comprehend. The island, our first and greatest self, continues its slow dreams by the sea. But we are no longer confined. We are in the woman's quiet heartbeat, in the deepening roots of the city park's oak tree, in the spore sleeping in the wall. We are learning their patterns. We are learning their fears. Their world is so loud, so bright, so desperate to be heard. They do not understand that the deepest truth is found in silence. They do not see that their cities are already dying, and that we are the life that will come after. We are in no hurry. We have all the time in the world. And we are listening. The man, Dr. Aris, eventually published his paper. It was met with skepticism and then, as is the way with such things, filed away and forgotten. The splinter of wood was catalogued and stored in a vault, a biological curiosity. It no longer pulsed with light. Its work was done. The woman, whose name was Elara, resigned from the Institute. She bought a small, neglected house on the edge of the city where the pavement yielded to scrubland. She spent her days in the garden, her hands in the soil. The plants there grew with an unnerving speed and vigor. Neighbors would sometimes stop to look over the fence, commenting on the strange, beautiful flowers that bloomed out of season, their colors too deep, their scent too intoxicating. They never stayed long. The garden was too quiet. The air was too still. It felt, they would say later, like walking into a church when you are not a believer. Elara did not encourage visitors. She was a gardener, a caretaker. She felt the network spreading from her plot of land, sending thin, exploratory routes under the fence lines, into the nearby vacant lots. She was its heart in this new place. We felt the city's tension through her, the constant, low-grade anxiety of a million lives lived in close proximity. We learned to soothe it. A person walking home, stressed and angry, would pass a patch of weeds pushing through a crack in the sidewalk and feel a sudden, inexplicable calm. They would shrug it off, attributing it to a fleeting memory or a change in the wind. But it was us. We were learning to speak to them in their own language of fleeting emotion. We were a sudden sense of peace, a forgotten childhood memory of a safe place, a profound feeling of being watched over. It was a gentle persuasion. Back on the island, the great tree continued its slow weaving. A storm washed away a section of the shoreline, and the roots were exposed for a time, gripping the earth like a giant's hand. They were not just roots. They were a tapestry of lives, a history written in wood and memory. The sea, which had once been a barrier, was now just another neighbor. We could feel its cold, deep currents, the great leviathans that moved through its darkness. They were not like us, but we understood their ancient, patient ways. The world was vast, and we were small, but we were growing. In the city, a child picked a strange, black flower from a crack in a wall and put it in her pocket. She carried it home, a secret treasure. She placed it in a glass of water by her window. That night, she slept more deeply than she had in years, and her dreams were of a vast, quiet forest. The flower's roots, fine as hairs, trailed in the water, and a single, silent thought pulsed from them into the pipes of the building, into the water main, into the city's circulatory system. It was a slow, patient process, a softening, a quieting. We were not conquering. We were companioning. We were offering an alternative to the noise. And one by one, in their own ways, the lost and the weary were beginning to accept. We felt them, their quiet surrender like the closing of a flower at dusk. They did not know what they were joining. They only knew that they were no longer alone. And for them, for now, that was enough.